All right, it looks like we are live.
I can hear you.
Yeah, there we go. We're live.
Hey, Ron.
Hi, I'm here with Emily Bezar, and she's got a few little albums that she put out over the years. And I reviewed
Exchange.
up to Exchange,
Yeah, up to exchange.
and at that point that was my favorite of the bunch, and I think it's tied now with your latest one, Out of the Moment.
Cool.
I think it was like the music kind of build up to that point for me personally.
I'm so glad. I know that we were discussing before we went live about how you're just, getting to know Out of the Moment. And it seems like yesterday to me. It was 2019, but given
Now, before the world ended.
before the world changed
Yeah,
dramatically, right?
yeah. So just want to show everybody. I don't have the first one.
I have like 3 copies left. I should have brought one to the table with me.
Yeah.
That's my second record. By the way, thank you for having me, Ron. And
Oh,
hi.
you're welcome.
Hello.
You're very welcome. I mean, this is here. I do this show for the artists to kind of promote themselves and then talk about the music and of course, the current climate of pandemic and how I think we're coming out of it now. I'm hoping, I'm really hoping that because a lot of you musicians have been suffering that you can't play live. I mean, I noticed there's a lot of them now doing it, but 2020 and most of 2021, no one was doing it.
Yeah, it was a full stop for the whole enterprise. And I mean, we could talk an hour about the world situation. We're sitting here
Right.
today, and we're very lucky to be not in the path of bombs. Some unfortunate situation in Ukraine, and thinking about it, distracted by it, as we all are. And for me, the pandemic didn't really stop a live career. As you probably know, I haven't done a lot of live performing the past decade, for many reasons. A lot changed my life. I moved. And I've never made a livelihood as a live performing musician or a side person or a gigging musician in other people's projects. So I didn't experience that drop off the cliff financially that I know people who did. And I think for some people, I think the government came through quite well for, depending on how you were situated, whether you could get unemployment or whether you had other work that didn't require you to be with people. So everybody experienced it in a different way. But again, for me, it didn't stop. It stopped a plan that I wanted to perform more in 2020 as I hadn't in 2019. It stopped my plans. It made me just divert course.
Right.
But it wasn't traumatic in that way because I knew that if I, wanted to keep making music, I wasn't going to be hindered in my own home from doing so. I just wasn't going to be able to advance a performing career, which I never, I haven't had huge ambitions to do so for many years, mostly because it's difficult to gather the resources and the band and to go out and to do something on a scale and keeping the bar high enough to make it worth, inviting audiences going across the country. It's very a lot, to mount that kind of tour. But people have been so creative in the way they brought their music to their fans.
Oh yeah.
With live streams and paring things down and outside concerts. I know around here where I live in Virginia now, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, there's a very wonderful scene of local breweries and venues where people can play outside. And so I was
cool.
able to go and hear bands in the warmer months last year, after most people had their vaccine, and there was a period of time where it was very flourishing outdoors, and and then that went away again when it got cold and during the Omicron surge. And I'm hopeful that at least where I live, as a fan, as somebody who wants to go out and see local music, I can do it again safely from here on out. I'm hopeful. And maybe even play.
Right.
Stay tuned.
Well, I've noticed, with the bands that I've spoke to, that there's they were in two camps. One where basically we're coming up on it, March 13th, when, at least in the United States, when we shut everything down. There were some that go, okay, well, this is going to be like a 2 or 3 week deal, and we'll resume. And it obviously never happened, and they never resumed. But then I've seen on the other side, there's people that have been, full steam ahead, making albums. Hey, we can't go tour, so let's just make our music, so when this thing is over, we'll have plenty of new material to perform live.
And it's been kind of a blessing in some ways for some artists, for sure. And I think that the work that's being written now is going to be fascinating to look at. I mean, there've already been albums released, but I think in the next year or two, the pandemic records that describe the inner life everybody had during this time.
Oh yeah,
I mean, who knows? And that's dovetailing with the most horrible war situation we've seen in our lifetime, at least I think in our generation. We don't know how it's going to play out yet. Obviously, we've had a lot of wars in the past 20 years that we've experienced. But yes, it's a really, there is one thing I will say, though, that at least in the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of my artist friends were discussing how they felt this sort of pressure to well, I've got to create. It's expected of me. I'm an artist. I have to respond now. I've got all this time. I need to write. It just doesn't work that way. We can't create on demand, and it takes time to process the personal experiences that we had, especially in the first year. And so I think it's a little, not everybody's going to be super prolific right out of the gate.
Right.
For me, I was in 2019 and very early 2020, I was looking for a day job. I decided it was time for me to make a living. Again, I had taken some time off. A big move from California to Virginia for family reasons. And I found a job in early March of 2020. And I started a week before my state went on lockdown. And it was a very good job. I was very happy to have it. I was able to work from home. So I worked full-time from my home for most of the pandemic, not in music. And it was a blessing to have the job, but it also forced me to compartmentalize my music making in a way that I hadn't done in about 5 years. And so I experienced the pressure to be creative now that the pandemic's here, the pressure to keep this job, because if I lose it and don't want it, I won't find another one until after the pandemic's over. So it was a very interesting new experience for me, and it brought up a lot of new ways of being creative and of accessing my creativity in isolation and also unlimited time. And it was all good. Again, I feel fortunate.
Well, yeah, like I said, for the musicians that I talked to, they were basically in two camps. And then the ones that went full stream ahead, there was some that actually learned some behind the scenes on how to like master and mix their own music, so they didn't have to wait for someone outside to do it. They learned how to do it. And so, that was their blessing for it, that they got to learn a new trade,
Yeah, which will be incredibly valuable going forward. I mean, every technical skill I've learned along the way in terms of engineering, producing, recording, it's not only saved me money in making records, but I just feel like I have that much more control over the sound I'm trying to achieve, and the pride of having this skill set, maybe someday can be applied to other people's work. I mean, that's one way to think about being a musician for hire, or I don't know.
Yeah, and you were mentioning earlier, live streaming, and I think that's something that more the musicians out there that are, should take advantage of in a way, so that you can actually, I think by live streaming, even though you won't have the one-on-one with your audience, you get to the fan halfway across the world will be able to see you perform. So
it's a great, it's an incredible way to have a performing life without investing in a tour or I sometimes, as somebody who came from classical music, which is fairly formal, and there's a degree to which, when I see a performance, I'm looking for the magic of the venue, of the context of, rather than seeing somebody who, I mean, everybody does it differently, but who may be, in their living room. Here we are. Let me throw up a light and a mic and give you get to see the person, you get to connect with them as an artist, but the actual musical experience may be less interesting than the personal experience you're having, because what you really want is some vibe. It's very hard to capture vibe, but it's been amazing. I just think there's a whole new milieu of performing that's evolved during this time, and though I did not participate, doesn't mean I never will. I think it's advancing the independent music scene. I think popular and very, very, huge artists with huge audiences, haven't, while they have, many of them have done live streams. I think it's really helped independent artists who have continued to grow their audience during this time.
Oh yeah. Well, I noticed that the progressive rock community is, we kind of a close-knit group of people that we kind of, during this time, where you can't go to concerts, it's like everybody's kind of recommending, I just got this album. I think you'll like it, and stuff that when probably normally wouldn't have done because your mind elsewhere. But now that a lot of people have all this time on their hands, they're buying. I think people bought more music during the pandemic than before. I mean, I could be wrong, but
I'd be interested to see if anybody's done a study on this, but I can say that we've all needed comfort, we've needed escape, we've needed reminders of beauty and safety. And I mean, everybody experienced the pandemic differently. Some people had
right.
a lot of tragedy in their lives, and but I think music as a companion helps people. Art, it brings people together and it soothes us. Even art that is not soothing will soothe us because
Right.
we can escape into other kinds of drama that are not drama of the real world, and it's safer.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me, and I hope that it will. I hope it's brought a new appreciation for the power of music to affect personal change, and I hope that will continue. I hope that's a legacy of the pandemic.
I hope so too. And I have noticed it so far this year. There's a lot of releases. And actually, for me, it's too many for me to catch up on. You know,
Well, you
uh,
look at you have at least 500 behind you right there.
I
You've listened to so much,
oh
Ron,
yeah,
and I know you've been catching up on my albums.
oh
I
yeah,
was telling you earlier that I think you know my albums better than I do right now. I haven't
yeah.
listened to
And
several of
then
them for quite some
and then
time.
you and then you got your third one. Is that
Four Wall
correct?
Spending, my third one. Yes, yes, that was pre-millennial,
Yeah,
1999.
1999. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then we got your
Angel's Abacus, 2004 or five.
yes,
Oh my gosh, what? No, four.
2004. Yeah.
Man. So yes. Now I want to say that Four Walls Bending in 1999, I think, was the first album that kind of brought some people in the progressive rock audience to my music. Would you say that's right?
I think
Because
so.
that
Because
was the first record where I used guitars in a substantial way
yeah,
in their arrangements, and I don't, and some of the, since I was really thrilled with the response from the prog community to that record. I still am not exactly sure what, other than the guitars, I did differently between, I know what I did differently from my first record. That was a classical album with me trying to become a pop singer. I mean, that's a very unusual record in all my output, and always I think the first record is. But Four Walls Bending was maybe I was making a rock record and I didn't know I was doing it.
I noticed that from that point on, it was getting a little more into rock. But I also noticed a lot of jazz albums.
Yes. Yes.
And
Absolutely.
so I think that's where people that are into progressive rock probably latched on, because a majority of them, I know a majority of my friends that are into progressive rock are also heavily into jazz, you know, jazz and jazz fusion.
You're so right. And I was just recently I was sort of revisiting some albums by some of the progressive rock, British progressive rock artists that I sort of the most astounded by, and listening again. And these are bands like Hatfield and the North, National Health, Henry anything, well, especially of anything Dave Stewart did with his keyboard playing. And I was listening thinking, man, no, this was happening right at the same time, like 68 through 75, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a music historian. I'm just going
Right.
on. But just how much similarity there was to American early fusion, even some of Return to Forever, and just harmonically, I mean, certainly the British prog jazz was almost more classically influenced melodically and harmonically than, say, Korea or Miles or that era. But still, I love that music and really understand more and more how much of a revolution there was in the British prog rock scene in incorporating jazz. That I will say, yes, jazz did come from America. It is an American art form, but it had already gone into Europe and the UK in the 50s and 60s. I mean, probably in the 30s and 40s, but it had already been digested in the 60s by British musicians. Some of them were using the blues and R&B, and then you had the Stones and that crew, and then everything, all the cerebral guys were going, let me hear all this whacked out harmony, and I'm going to put it in my prog band. And it's anyway, I can really geek out and become and aspire to be a music historian when I listen to that particular era. So you've answered my own question about my music, and that even though I don't consider myself a jazz artist, my love for jazz has pulled it in to my music enough that it attracts the ear of someone like you. Or so that's a long-winded way of saying I try to figure out my music even now. It's like, how did I do that? Why? Where did that come from?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm just amazed with musicians on how they can, go from what's up here down to their fingers or vocals, how they do it. It's just, I mean, I think I have a greater appreciation for it. And when I hear people go, why haven't you put out another album? And it's it's like you were saying earlier, it's a creative process. It can't be forced. It has to just come out naturally, or else
it has to come. Sometimes it can come on demand. Sometimes you can conjure it up. I can sit at the piano and I can say, hit me. I just want something. And other times I just have to stop and say, this isn't happening. And if you're mucking around for a whole day, let's say you have the luxury to not do anything else but decide to drink coffee and go back to your instrument on back and forth all day long, you are likely to get something. It's just a matter of statistics, right? The more time you spend in something, the more likely you are to be hit by a rainbow, or whatever.
Right.
But what you mentioned a moment ago about this process of translating the mind impulse of music into the body is something that I think is mysterious to every musician. I don't know if anybody would be able to tell you what that feels like. I mean, what the actual mechanics are. Certainly, who knows how the brain really, with the neurons and their signals. But one thing I will say is it is possible to know when you're in the zone, when you have slightly detached your consciousness. I mean, I'll get a little woo-woo here, but If you're in the process of playing an instrument, whether it's singing or your instrument with your hands or your mouth, there can be a moment at which you're so involved and so undistractable that you actually kind of lift out of your body a little. I'm not saying you're hovering above and watching yourself play, but you're in this zone, you've detached from normal reality and you're blending something. You're catching this intuitive wave and you're blending it with your physical wave, and you really feel like you're taken along on a force. And that's why I think they call a creative zone. And athletes have it, and painters and thinkers and mathematicians and anybody who's meditators. It's a meditative process. I think it's, you get somewhere else by focus, but it doesn't happen all the time. Once a month if you're lucky as an artist.
You know, I've seen people where they, it's like for some reason like it's on tap, it just keep on coming out, you know, and they don't probably, you know, have an overflow of musical ideas, and you know, I could probably be just as frustrated as not having ideas at all, because what are you gonna,
how are you going to capture them? I've had that experience where I'll be improvising at the piano and I'll be like, I'm not catching any of this. Usually I try to clip on my iPad, so at least I'll have a little photograph of something when I feel like I'm getting things. But yeah, to be playing, and then it's just a purely personal experience. And you know that it's going to be gone forever, but it's changed you in some way, perhaps because you've got all this stuff, and it's made you better that evening. You have more clear mind, and maybe you can, you know, figure out a problem because you've had a great session with your instrument. But you're right. There are people, there are marvels and geniuses who are never off, who constantly have inspired ideas. And I think, like, when you think about a lot of the jazz artists from throughout history, the improvisers, the great players who would just show up in these studios and they turn on the single or two mics and they would go, and they have 30, 40 sessions recorded of these groups where you feel like, did they ever have a moment when they weren't accessing all this amazing material? And coming back to jazz, that is one of the things that is miraculous to me about that type of music. I think rock too has inspired players, inspired soloists. But the one interesting, and I think about this often because I come from classical music, improvisation in modern classical music, you know, post Baroque era, in the era of Bach and but Handel and before, where there a lot of improvisation was done. Classical musicians haven't been required to be improvisers in the same way that rock and jazz musicians have. So the idea of being in the zone for a classical player is being in the zone as an interpreter. How can you capture and impart your humanity to this written music? Whereas for somebody who's creating on the spot, it means something totally different.
right?
I think about that. I mean, there are a lot of great classical players, don't get me wrong, who are also amazing jazz players or rock players, especially today when modern classical music is really moving into a blend between rock and jazz and classical more and more. It's really evolving quickly. So I think you're going to start to see, you did in the 60s, where you had these moments where players had to go off the score and improvise. They'd put pictures on the score and you'd have to sort of improvise the pictures. But there is more and more modern classical music that requires spontaneity and creativity. Anyway, I love to think
Yeah.
about this stuff. I think about it
Oh,
all
you
the
know, it's,
time.
well, I think all that stuff comes out in your music because uh, one thing that I notice and um, vocally, I think your peers right off the back, I think are Kate Bush and Tori Amos. I think you're
Surely.
right. You're right on that level with them.
Wow. Thank you
With the
for that.
with well when when you first sent me these things years ago for when I reviewed them and I was listening to it, I was like going, I have it's has that familiarity to it. There, it's like, oh, wait, she doesn't sound like them, but she sounds. I the
In the
only way I can
same
say sounds.
genre, in
Yeah, and
the
it's like,
same timbre of voice, the same range,
yeah,
some of the similar melodic contours. I mean, which is to say, wide,
yeah, because they're
not thin.
well, because those two plus you have a different range than, let's say, I'll say Ann Wilson of Heart. I mean, she has, it just goes, yeah, like
Well, I
this,
will
and
say,
yours goes a little everywhere, and theirs go a little everywhere, but
I think that you're onto something, and as somebody who still listens to lots of classical singers and jazz, all kinds of singers. I mean, very simply put, I think Tori Amos, not sure, and Kate Bush and other singers, not just me, we go into our head voice. So when we go above a certain range, we don't sing like a Broadway singer. We shift into sometimes a more breathy tone or a more classical tone. And
right.
Ann Wilson is a spectacular singer. I
Oh
think
yeah,
she's the greatest singer in rock. And I mean, yeah, I have a lot of favorites, but obviously I think we're on the same page about, she is a true, like Streisand, who I think is one of my great heroes, who I can't sing anything like. He can take this rich, warm chest voice all the way up. They don't
yeah,
seem to have a break in their voice. And that's physiology. That's not training. That's just how you're born. It's how your larynx is, how the
right.
spaces in your mouth are. It's how you're born. I'm not born that way, so I can't do that. Or I could, it would just sound very strained. So I've adapted my singing as a classical singer, which forces you to be in that head voice all the time. And I've blended it with more modern rock singing, and what comes out is what comes out. I don't think about it while I'm doing it. So that,
That's the wonderful thing is you can tell on some singers that it's coming out very naturally, and then you can tell on some other singers, especially I noticed in the progressive rock in the '90s that a lot of the male singers in bands coming from, especially from Europe, they're trying to sound either like Peter Gabriel or John Anderson. Just those two, and possibly others, but those are the two main ones. And it's almost like they're taking their natural voice and forcing it to something unnatural by trying to sound like someone else.
well, they're up maybe, and I don't know who you're referring to, but maybe they're applying style. I mean,
Yeah,
there's style, and then there's imitation. That I think it's rare that somebody actually tries to imitate another. It's very hard to do that because we're all built differently. But there are definite style points that a singer can gravitate towards and can imitate, and it's how we all learn. I like I said, I tried to sing along with Barbara Streisand records and Whitney Houston records. I could never do it. I had to stop. But we learn as imitators. And if we're lucky, we go on to develop our own voice. But as a singer, because it's such a personal communication and you're so exposed and vulnerable, it's hard to let go completely because you're so naked, you're so exposed, it's easier to hide behind style than
Right.
to just let it go. And
I mean, there's one bit that I remember from years ago, because in the 90s, I think it was like the biggest push of progressive rock underground wise since the 70s stuff, especially in Scandinavian countries like Sweden. You know, that was around 93 was when they kind of, I want to say they kind of took over the reins of it, you know, because there was a lot of bands that were coming out of there. And we had the Prague Fest in Los Angeles from 93 up to 2000 that brought in all these bands from all over the world, just from the different countries, you know. I mean, and you hear some of the bands the guys were sounding too much like Peter Gabriel. See, that's the thing, is they were sounding too much like him, not stylistically. It was almost like they're trying to, you know, basically did almost like a paint by numbers type of a thing, you know. And there's a lot of people in, you know, that we call them the prog snobs, that they say some albums sound like it's prog by numbers, you know. It's like, it's not.
And that happens in every genre, of course. I mean, as it develops and people see what people like, well, like, I want a little of that audience. So how can I mold myself to, you know, captivate that audience? It's understandable. And, you know, I think it evolves. I'm sure it's evolved since then. There's probably a different person that they model after. And
well, I've noticed after 2000, it seems like more people were. It seemed like I don't know if this is the right way of saying it, but they're realizing that they can be themselves and they don't need to. I mean, they can take what came before and then go forward and, you know, channel it through them if they're a singer or play an instrument. You know, it's like they don't have to sound like Peter Gabriel.
Yeah.
They don't have to play like Steve Howe. You know,
I think it's a matter of maturing as an artist.
Yeah. And
maturing into your own sound and finding success and support for that too. I think I'm so grateful that I actually have listeners like you and others who tell me they want me to make another record, or they think what I'm doing is compelling enough that I should keep doing it. I mean, it's really, and when you've spoken with your own voice and you can still find an audience with your own voice, it's very empowering. It gives you a lot of confidence. And I think artists generally don't go backwards from that point into their more sort of imitative phase, because you're coming into flower.
Right. I think with the, you know, I think why a lot of people are saying, you know, that they'd like to see you more, I think it's based on these two.
Well, thank you.
I think the first four were building up to this. You got to, in a way, at least from the audience standpoint, you got to where we like well, we like what came before, but it seemed like this is like, I don't know, it's like you're the pinnacle in a way
Well, but
without,
it should be that way. I'm glad that my first two records were my best. I I thank you, Ron. I really am glad that you can see I guess what a culmination or how my ideas are being distilled. I not purified. I think expanded is the word for me, because I'm not a reductionist. If you probably can tell by listening to my music, I'm not a conceptual artist. I don't take a little piece of what happened before and expand it. I keep adding. I am, at least so far, I'm not saying I'm never going to reduce into a smaller box. That's something that I reserve the right to do as an artist. But both Exchange and Out of the Moment were fully conceived as band records, not as solo album with a bunch of stuff thrown on top. You know what I mean? I think that, and the players, I could not make this music without playing with the great players I have played with. There's no, I mean, I wouldn't be able to realize the vision. And they've actually taken what started as songs that could have gone any way, that could have become like a classical art song, it could have become a jazz crooner song, and the nature of the way the band worked it out turns it into something I never could have done. It just has expanded the sound so much. I mean, not without my, I mean, I'm a producer, so I do have a vision for the end I want to achieve, and then I kind of guide things along the way and edit where necessary and load on more where necessary. And but it's exciting because I get to see my musical, the kernel of my musical thought expand through other people's vision too. So I think that's what you're feeling in these records, maybe, you know, is the combination.
would you say based on all that, that at least the last two have a more band feel and the others were more of solo albums?
Well, I wouldn't, I mean, I guess dynamic is what I mean.
Yeah.
But big, able to create, what's the word I want to use, what that the band can do, what a rhythm section and guitars can do for my music is they can delineate its structure better than I can do on my own. And when I say structure, I mean horizontal structure, like start, where's the moment at which this song wants to go somewhere else and makes you stay with it, tension, release, all the tension and release. You create that in the melodies and in the harmonies, but you also create it in the sonic texture, loudness to softness. Now we all know that everything gets squished on an album. When you see something live, it can be roaring loud and tiny soft. On a record, it gets compressed, but you try to achieve the swell and fall. At least I do. At least I think rock, the great rock records I love, still have a big surge and fall. It's dynamic music. Very, very different from, I mean, when a solo, and I'm not saying that my solo pieces aren't dynamic. I think I play and sing quite dynamically too, but they don't achieve the same energy or kinetic feel. Maybe that's what I mean.
Yeah, that's what I noticed, that it's especially the last two, and with I think especially with Exchange, that seems to be like a bigger sound in a way. I mean, when I heard that, I was like going, it's 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 such a difference from the previous one, and
It's,
which
yeah,
which is one thing that I like in an artist that don't do this, when they don't do the same thing each time.
Absolutely. And we try sometimes hard not to repeat yourself as an artist. That you don't know you're doing it. I want to say about Exchange, that album has a lot of edge in it to me. And I
Yes.
say edge, I mean a little bit of anger, a little bit of, some of the lyrics are a little sardonic or arch or something. And it's just a period of life you go through and you write about it. And it also, the other thing it has is it has free moments. It has moments where I told the horn players, play whatever you want. Let's just go. A little, I'm borrowing from, maybe it's free jazz or prog, jazz, or I have regretted I haven't done more of that in my recordings. I've been pretty tightly controlled my arrangements. I'm hopeful that in the future I can explore more of this sort of freedom with other players. And I'm not just talking about freedom to play a solo. I'm saying, let's just take the song from here to there in a completely free way, or I'm just going to play whatever I want. I'm going to do a stream of consciousness moment. The challenge is always moving from that kind of freedom back into something more structured without sounding contrived and without, and so when a song gets big and the arrangement splats all over the place and the dynamics get so big, you have to go somewhere from there.
Right.
That's the moment as an arranger where you're like, how can I do this gracefully? Or else it's just going to sound like what just happened was bombast, because you need to make that matter. You have to have a response to that. I think all composers, like classical composers, like big orchestral scores, I love them when they just like about to go off the cliff and either they pull back or then there's just a totally different texture that comes in, but then you have to make it sound easy too at the same time.
Right.
So I'm glad you appreciate the breadth of on the bigness of that record, because I'm glad I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I did notice too, you were saying edgier, in your sense, but also in the way, the guitars and the drum sound seems to be a little bit more, I'd say, in your face kind of a thing, where which I'm glad in modern progressive rock that's happening, because in the 90s progressive rock, it seemed like they were borrowing too much from the 70s, where the drums were way back there. They were not as prominent. Maybe that could be the recordings, the way they were recorded.
I certainly think that the sort of revolution in rock recording in the 90s, when I guess, yes, it had happened in some heavy metal earlier, not so much the big bottom end, the grunge recordings, and then modern rock, alternative rock, where the compression started coming, drums started becoming crisper, snares were crisper, drums were bigger, the guitars were compressed in your face. That modern rock sound has definitely changed the sound of modern progressive music. I mean, in some ways, I don't know if there's better or worse, but it's definitely changed it. And also the way people listen to music is different. People listen in their cars. You listen to some of the classic rock records, they're so beautifully dynamic and I love it, but you can't listen in the car. You lose the quiet parts, So it's been a revolution. And I know a lot of mastering engineers are fighting against it now, because they're bringing back some of the dynamics that were lost in the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah, I've noticed on some of the the older albums when they get remastered. I think when they were remastered, some of them were remastered in the 90s. They were like heavy on compression to the point where keep on seeing this thing they call loudness wars,
Yes.
where that's a, you know, higher volume meant it was supposed to be better sounding, and it can like completely distorts. I don't even remember what album I got back then. That the thing, it was just so, it felt like it was gonna blow up one of my speakers because it just sounded so
And
distorted.
And it's fatiguing on the body and the ears to have this solid wall of the same decibel the whole time. We need breaks. We need things to rise and fall that match our internal rhythm. I mean, and it's happening without us even knowing it. I mean, we say, why am I not digging this music? Well, it's because there's this huge wall of sound coming at me the whole time. And it's not something that the average music listener can gauge. And then of course with the, now everybody listens to streaming with compressed sound. There's stuff that's happening beyond our understanding. The sound is lost so much. I mean, I'm not going to get into, I think that the ability to hear music in MP3s and streaming has, the advantages have greatly outstripped the disadvantages of losing our fidelity. And people can argue with me. I mean, I could argue that from both sides. I think we wouldn't be talking, you and I wouldn't be talking today if
I still
streaming didn't exist. You know,
I still think, you know, that the physical media is the best way to go, because streaming, I can't say so much about music stuff, but when you stream on a movie platform, you know, they'll have that one movie this month, but next month it's going to be gone. And then you're going to go, what? That was my favorite movie. I want to see it.
then you have to buy it.
Yeah,
that's
what I always say.
It's like music. If you like what you hear on the stream, then you buy it, because then the person can make another record for you to stream.
Exactly.
It's a way, it's an advertising tool. You know, it's like it's a way to taste test things. And that's the way I like to think that I would use Spotify. If there's an artist that I discover and I listen to it 2 or 3 times, at that point I will say, I think it's time that I buy this. And
that's exactly. And also too is those things are a convenience, you know, just like YouTube, you know, and it's just a convenience. But to me, it's not to take a place of, it's to, I think almost in addition to, you know, it's like,
yes,
this is your main way of listening, but if you're in your car and you want to have 10 of your favorite albums or something like that, you know, you put one of these in your car, you know, little thumbprint. I mean, it doesn't sound the same as the CD or the record
vinyl,
or the cassette. You still do those, you know. It doesn't have that same thing, but it's like, for me, I gave up on radio in the early 2000s because it was the same rotation of the same songs. They never deviated from the songs. They never did those, what they call the deep cuts.
right? But I will say there are some great college radio stations, and I've discovered one here in the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, WTJU, I believe. Fantastic shows. I've heard music that just stunned me, and it was great driving along on a beautiful sunny day through the countryside and hearing this bizarre music coming from this college radio station. Thank God they still exist. That's
the one thing, is those are the link, almost like the links to the past. Not so much the music, but it's like how they play the music. They're not just playing the hits. They're playing the deep cuts, the
And
songs that they get overlooked, you know.
and the DJs have their own taste and they want to share their discoveries. Just like you as a reviewer and a prog fan and a critic, you find something you just want to tell people about, and it's always going to be that way. At the end, it's what drives the viral discovery of music and social media. It's people just wanting to shout about what they've discovered.
Then you got this, your
My most recent record, Out of the Moment, which I recorded here in Virginia with truly wonderful players. I'm so lucky that I'm in a part of the country where the brilliant musicians. I really kind of hit the ground running when I got here, and I just started working on songs that I had started, some of them even in 2013 to 2015, and I had to put them away when I was working full time for a while in California. And then I brought them out and I decided which ones I was going to keep and which ones I was going to discard, and I wrote new ones. And it was an incredible period. And I'm going into another period of writing right now that I hope will produce something to release next year, 2023. I'm looking forward to working again hard this year. I'm starting the editing process of going through, 2 years of ideas, as we talked about, captured on my iPad, little by little, through stolen moments that are going to generate, the process now is constructing cohesive musical statements out of lots of little ideas. Feel like an editor more than a writer right now, but every time you edit, you always get new ideas. So, you can never stop. I hope I never stop collecting musical ideas or receiving them, I should say, generating them. I really do enjoy. I love recording and I love bringing something to a finished product, but I think that the process of creation is the most exhilarating for me. And thank you for appreciating that in my music. I know that you can hear the creative spark.
Well, I like when new music comes to me, whether it's something that comes out of the blue or recommended, whether it's a brand new or if it's, a few years old or decades old, it's, I think that's one of the person that loves music. I think that's probably one of a small but important responsibility is to share and tell people, check this out.
I appreciate that you feel that way. Thank you. That's a really generous spirit to bring to music. And I feel the same way. I feel like I don't listen to as much music as I used to. I need to listen to more. I do, but not as much as you. I certainly feel like somebody like you as a consummate listener, and you have a breadth of knowledge. It's great to have, as an artist, it's great to have my music listened to by somebody who's listened to a lot, because they understand where it comes from, and it feels, you feel heard, you feel understood.
I think in my age now, I'm more open to newer musics, whether it's a brand new artist or if it's an older artist
Mhm.
than I was, say, 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I was a little more closed off and, I only want to listen to this thing. If it doesn't fall into that parameter, you know, I can't be bothered. But now it's like, I want to hear more things because it's like, there's so much out there. I mean,
There is
I,
so much. There is so much. And, and a lot of it is great. And, again, I appreciate the opportunity to have my music heard, is somehow to have it rise through the noise. And it's gratifying, and it helps independent artists to continue, even though, I make about $8 a year on Spotify, I call it my Spotify burrito, every year I treat
right.
myself to my earnings, a little, take myself to lunch. I'm grateful for the existence of digital music and streaming platforms. I want change to occur, as we all do.
Right.
I want to help educate. I want to help remind listeners that we're not going to be able to keep making music unless we can make a little back from it. So,
Exactly.
but nonetheless, I wouldn't be here talking to you if it weren't for that.
Well, I spoke with one of my friends, and he teaches music, and he was talking about CDs, and his students are like 19, 20 years old, and one of them actually says, "What's a CD?"
Yeah.
And it's like, our generation is like, you know, that was just a weird. It shocked him because he's in the mentality, that CDs are a part of his life. Just as vinyl is. So it's like
Yeah.
all they knew is they can get this music free off of the internet. They didn't know that it had to be paid for, and it's like
Yeah.
like I told him, I said, yeah, because the musicians have to buy their instruments. If they don't have their own studio, they have to buy studio time in order to create this. So yes, you buy the CD. I mean, use the streaming platforms in addition to the purchase of the CD or vinyl. It's like
Well,
there's or if you don't have the room for physical media, there's the purchase of digital media like on Bandcamp.
yes,
And there
absolutely.
you can stream it
Yeah,
there.
you can, or you can purchase, but I think it's true. We are now, the generation has been born that will never have experienced the exchange of money for music, that don't conceptually understand that I mean, think of it as a commodity or something, a
Right.
trade or any kind of exchange of economic activity. It is water, it's in the air, and it is air. It's just molecules of air moving around.
Right.
It will never again be monetizable, and it won't. I mean, I don't think, but what will have to happen is that the money, it will have to educate, there have to be some sort of very early intervention with people. It says, this is music. This is how it's made. This is what happens to get it from the people who make it to it coming out of your computer. And this is how much it costs. And this is what's going to happen if that doesn't, ultimately, they're going to have to understand that it will go away if they don't at least conceptualize that there has to be some trade. Otherwise, it's over. I mean, I don't want to be, you know what I'm saying? There has to be education. And we're artists right now. We're trying to do the educating, but ultimately we got to make music. We can't educate people. It has to be society at large.
Yeah, and you were saying that the idea of exchanging money for music, and also the thrill of, now opening up a package from the mail and pulling out what you ordered, or if you're in an area where there's a local record store, to go in there and thumb through, whether it's the vinyl or
thrill
the
of
CD.
yeah, and I will say this though, I think those who are not worried about the lack of, of recorded music being no longer sellable, those who are not worried say, but it's actually increased the availability of live performance, the immediacy of live performance, the use of, that people are now relying on live performance more to generate whatever income stream they're going to be putting back into the recordings. It's an outcome, I guess, that may have been obvious. It's good. However, I don't know. God, I get my brain explodes when I think about this too long.
Right.
I try not to.
Well, it's like this. There has to be that exchange between an understanding that music is not something that just comes out of the air, unless you're the one that's actually creating it and you're willing to give it away. That's there. There's some people that think that that's what that you have to do, and it's like,
well, you do. I mean, I have long ago expected now to give it away. I mean, it's not I mean, I just told you I worked full time for 2 years. That's because I have no belief. I don't care if I have 9 albums. I'm not going to make a living on those. It's some paradigm would have to shift so dramatically, and my viral fame would have to explode. There's no way. So I think a lot of us, in some sense, you could say we've capitulated. And yes, it's there. We're happy to have the listeners and the audience, and we will find a way to keep making the music we have to make, if it means we, have to do other things to make that happen. But I don't mean, so even though I may say I've capitulated, I don't think the fight is over. I don't think the greater society should give up the goal of teaching young people to value music, to value art, to value its function in their life. And getting back to what I said at the very beginning, we were talking about the pandemic. Hopefully, through this kind of mass trauma that we've all gone through and are going through still, and people having realized that they need comfort and they need art and they need music, that maybe we've made some advance in that,
Right.
I don't know. I hope, but I also want money to be spent on medical research. I don't think I'm a musician, but there are many valuable ways for people the society to support things. And we'll see where we are. If you and I speak again in maybe a few years, 3 to 5 years down the line, and we'll be very interesting to see where
things
the world
go.
is.
Yeah.
And as we speak today, who knows what's happening in Europe. And I truly believe that as an artist, the best thing I can do as I have no platform to help in any other way, is just to keep making music and to keep adding beauty and to the world, to the air.
I think that's
the best I can do.
Anybody can do is,
Yeah.
we do what we can do. that's really basically what it comes down to. It we do what we can do, whatever you're able to do, that's it's good to do that. um, and I honestly think that uh, music needs to continue, because for me personally, it's a healing tool.
Absolutely. I can
and it,
tell
and it
that for you. Yes.
and it's also a nice little escape. When the real world is tense, especially like it is now, it's nice to put on your headphones even for a couple minutes and just escape somewhere. You got to come back, but at least you got a little bit of an escape.
And hopefully that music changes you a little bit every time you hear it and you emerge slightly better than you were before.
Right.
And yeah, and I guess as an artist, that is our goal, is to change people for the better. I mean, not that we want to have control, but I never want to leave anybody unaffected. I don't think I can hate what I do, but I want them to have a reaction. I think every artist craves a reaction to their art, and anyway, I really thank you again, Ron, for
I thank you.
inviting me. And
well, I thank you for taking the time out of your Sunday to join me.
It's not quite sunny enough out for me to regret having gone on a hike, but on a normal sunny day, I might be out walking, or in the summer, I'd be kayaking. Or it's such a beautiful place where I live. There's so much beauty around, and I'll be starting my garden soon.
Yeah, that's something I would love, but being in an apartment building, we don't.
But you're in Maine, you have the beautiful ocean. Are you far from the ocean?
About, I want to say 45 minutes. About that, an hour, 45, somewhere in that.
That's great.
It's not too far. I mean, the closest area to go is Bar Harbor.
Oh, it's beautiful. I've been there. Oh, it's just gorgeous. Acadia.
Well,
I will, if I'm up in your neck of the woods, I will let you know next time I'm in Bar Harbor.
Okay.
All right. But I really appreciate this, and thank you everybody for joining, and I hope I'll have some more music for you next year.
I
plan to.
We all look forward to that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Emily.
Thanks so much, Ron. Okay.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Thank you.